On the morning of the 14th of October, 1883, the wind raced over the Dakota Plains. Long before the initial snowflake landed, it brought the metallic smell of snow. Residents of Granite Creek were occupied with typical autumn tasks, mending roofs using tar, sealing window cracks with cloth, and stacking unseasoned wood along cabin walls. Passing the cabin at the forest edge, they would glance up and laugh. There, 8-year-old Anna, living alone, wasn't constructing but demolishing with the steady, grim resolve of someone digging a grave. Beneath her own house, she was digging out the ground. To an outsider, this seemed insane. For the experienced frontiersman at the saloon, it appeared to be suicide. From the open cellar, they observed soil being tossed out. She formed heaps of clay and stone, then painstakingly moved them to a drainage ditch 50 yards away. She never spoke to the onlookers. Without offering any explanation, she just wielded the pickaxe. The metallic ring of steel on rock repeated steadily, like a metronome marking time until snowfall engulfed everything. Though not big, Anna had the lean, tough resilience of sun-dried rawhide. Her palms were rough, nails cracked, and her face frequently bore streaks of gray underground clay. Her sole companion, Otto, a large German shepherd with amber eyes. As the temperature fell, his fur grew thicker. He perched at the edge of the hole. He stood as a quiet guard, observing her lower herself into darkness. People in town murmured that the solitude had finally driven her insane. They claimed a solitary woman couldn't handle the frontier's brutal conditions. Her excavation was only a physical sign of a mental breakdown. They failed to notice the calculations she traced in the soil using a twig. They didn't realize that her earth removal wasn't random. She was constructing a survival mechanism founded on principles either forgotten or never known. She was building what could be called a thermal battery, an underground lung that would function when the surface world couldn't. The air in Granite Creek was becoming harsh, with temperatures falling 10 degrees each hour. Anna, however, didn't hurry. Haste kills accuracy. Her motions were slow and purposeful, excavating 1 cubic foot of dirt at a time. She appeared unaware of the jeers coming from the road. The townsfolk of Granite Creek had no idea, couldn't possibly know, that Anna wasn't acting on impulse. Rather, she was driven by a memory from 3 years earlier, 200 miles north. She had witnessed her father's death. Cold wasn't the direct cause, it was wet timber. They left firewood piled outside without cover, expecting a mild winter. When the 1,880 blizzard came, covering the cabin up to the chimney, the wood became a solid block encased in ice. The small amount they could break free hissed and smoked, filling the room with harsh fumes that stung their lungs yet gave off no warmth. She recalled the noise of his cough, a damp, rattling wheeze that faded as the flames went out. She vividly recollected the horrifying moment of understanding that his body lost heat quicker than the smoldering wood could supply it. In his homeland, he had worked as a mining engineer, someone deeply familiar with the earth. During his final moments of delirium, he mentioned the ground's breath and the solidity of deep rock. He did not bequeath wealth or property. Instead, he left a leather journal containing drawings of mine, tunnels, ventilation systems, and temperature variations. Anna stored this journal in oilcloth, pressed against her skin beneath her clothing. She treated it as both holy text and design plan. The fragile pages bore the sharp, exact script of someone who quantified everything in terms of structural weights. A heavily marked diagram illustrated a hypocaust system, an ancient Roman heating method later adopted by deep miners. It demonstrated employing the stable underground temperature of 55 degrees Fahrenheit, unaffected by surface conditions, to warm the air drawn into a fire. It explained the need to dry timber not simply by sheltering it, but by exposing it to a continuous flow of dry air. Anna was not simply excavating a cellar. She was building an extremely efficient combination of kiln and living quarters. She overcame the pain of that recollection by working. The sorrow from her father's icy muteness, she transformed into each strike of the pick and every load of earth. This was a counter to the cold that had claimed him. With mathematical assurance, she decided she would never depend again on the unreliable goodwill of the world above. The recollection of that dense, blinding, cold smoke motivated her to guarantee that the wood would burn clean, hot, and properly when she lit a match this winter. Building was a battle of endurance against the area's geological makeup. The ground consisted of dense, intractable heavy clay and river stone. Anna had to reinforce the walls progressively with aged oak beams that she had cut and flattened months earlier. She constructed a tunnel network in the shape of a T. The vertical tunnel was positioned under the cabin's fireplace. The horizontal tunnel ran 20 feet past the cabin's outline. It slanted gently upward to a disguised air intake concealed in a heap of rocks, serving as the cold air snorkel. The principle was elegantly straightforward. Because cold air is heavier, it descended into the intake and moved through the earth-insulated channel. There it was, heated by the ground's temperature, and then rose into the stove's combustion area. However, the real breakthrough lay in how she stored the wood. Instead of stacking the wood, she arranged it along the tunnel walls. She constructed lattice racks. The timber stored there was cut into exact 1/8-inch pieces. She arranged them in a crosshatch layout to maximize exposed surface area. As air was pulled from outside through the tunnel toward the stove, it flowed over the wood, removing moisture. This created an ongoing drying cycle. The wood wasn't merely dry, it was exceptionally dehydrated, cured by the same airflow used to fuel the fire. The effort of shifting tons of soil and wood would have crushed someone less determined. Her hands bled and the skin became raw in spite of leather gloves, and her back contracted in spasms, compelling her to crawl up the ladder each night. Nevertheless, she followed a tight schedule. Excavate for 4 hours, reinforce for 2, chop timber for 2, rest for 6. Repeat. She consumed minimal food-dried deer meat and hard biscuit and avoided using her winter provisions. Otto observed her, his ears flicking in response to the stressed timbers. Now and then he whined, perceiving the fatigue emanating from her. She would stop briefly, pressing her face into his dense coat to seize a bit of warmth, then go back into the gloom. She was turning into an underground dweller, her vision acclimating to the lantern's faint glow, and her ears attuned to the earth's creaking. By early November, the excavation was finished, but the town's distrust had turned into open antagonism. The local leaders, who took pride in their control over the land, perceived her hard work as a direct challenge to their authority. It was essential for them that she be wrong, because if she were right, their lack of preparation would be exposed. One afternoon, a delegation appeared at the entrance of her cabin. Captain Miller, a former cavalry officer who managed the general store and served as the town's unofficial leader, headed the group. Flanking him were Thomas, the village blacksmith, and Reverend Good, a man who saw evil in anything unfamiliar. What he couldn't control threatened him. They assembled on her porch. Gazing at the muddy entrance to her refuge, Captain Miller spoke first, his tone oozing with patronizing sympathy. "Anna," he began, hooking his thumbs under his suspenders, "we have concerns. You're compromising the structural integrity of your house. When the weight of snow comes, this whole cabin will fall into the pit you've dug. This is a massive strategic blunder." Thomas the blacksmith kicked a support beam near the doorway. "The wood will rot underground, girl," he grunted, his face covered with soot from his forge. "Moisture will destroy those beams. Come January, you'll be buried alive. It's simple mechanics. You can't fight the dampness." Reverend Good added, clutching his Bible, "This goes against nature," he intoned. With his eyes narrowing, he declared that humans belong under the sky, not creeping into the earth like a serpent. "You're digging your own grave, child. You're tempting fate by refusing the shelter that God provided." Anna stood in the doorway, with Otto tense at her side. She looked at the three men, the soldier who trusted commands, the craftsman who trusted metal, and the priest who trusted dogma. Not one of them trusted mathematics. "The beams are treated with creosote," she said, her voice hoarse from days of silence. "Airflow prevents decay, and the foundation sits on bedrock, not clay." The men exchanged glances and laughed. "Creosote and airflow?" Miller scoffed. "You're using fancy words for a pointless task. When the roof collapses, don't expect us to dig you out." They turned and left, their laughter carried away by the wind, leaving Anna alone with the gathering gray sky. The disaster came not with a roar, but with a far more terrifying silence. On the morning of November 22nd, the birds fell silent, and the squirrels that usually foraged in the late autumn had vanished. The air pressure dropped so quickly that Anna felt her ears pop as she climbed down the ladder. The sky turned a bruised purple, then a flat, featureless white. It was the Great White Death, a blizzard system that had been building strength over the Canadian Rockies. It surged southward with the force of a freight train. In the village, the temperature fell from freezing to 20 below zero within 4 hours. The wind picked up, howling like a banshee, driving snow horizontally with such force that it stripped paint from the sides of buildings. Panic spread through the town. Families rushed to bring in more wood, but the logs on their porches were already coated with ice. They stuffed rags into the cracks in their walls, but the wind blew them out. Fires blazed in hearths, but the poorly designed, cold chimneys backdrafted, filling the rooms with smoke. Captain Miller stood by his window, watching the whiteout consume his barn, his military training useless against an enemy that couldn't be shot. Thomas the blacksmith hammered boards over his windows, his hands trembling. With the frigid nails stinging his flesh, Reverend Good was on his knees beside the fire, beseeching for rescue as the draft sent chills down his spine. Yet at the forest border, there was no alarm. Anna summoned Otto indoors and secured the thick oak cabin door. Rather than lighting the main room's fire, she lifted the trap door and went underground. In the bunker, the air was motionless. The wall thermometer showed 55 degrees chilly, yet bearable, as she struck a match. The flame blazed consistently, and she applied it to the birch bark tinder in her modified stove. The airflow ignited immediately. Air from the intake tunnel, warmed by the ground, surged in to fuel the blaze. A flawless column of smoke ascended the chimney, propelled by the draft physics she had designed. Perched on a crate with Otto's head on her knee, she heard the storm roaring overhead. A far-off, subdued roar that couldn't affect her, she remained secure as others started to succumb to the cold. For 3 days, the blizzard clutched the world in a smothering white grasp, and the wind never eased. It kept up a constant wail, as if the planet itself were shrieking in agony. Within Granite Creek, the scenario had degraded from worry to disaster, with the relentless and unforgiving physics of extreme cold. At -40, the dampness in the unseasoned logs piled by the villagers immediately turned to ice. That ice expanded, rupturing the timber's internal channels when they attempted to ignite it. The moisture needed to vaporize for the wood to catch fire, and that transition demanded vast amounts of energy that the fading fire in Captain Miller's house lacked entirely. The large iron stove felt frigid. The family clustered beneath mounds of buffalo hides, yet frost advanced across the planks. Their breath floated in the air like a thriving mold, freezing onto their woolen scarves. Now they were setting fire to furnishings, chairs, tables, every dry item that would ignite. However, drafts penetrating the walls drew off warmth quicker than they could produce it. By sharp contrast, under the prairie's frozen surface, Anna dwelled in a haven of steady thermal dynamics. The subterranean room wasn't hot but was dry, maintaining a constant 6-5 degree temperature. The hypocaust operated perfectly. With relentless efficiency, the incoming air pulled through the 50-foot subterranean pipe was heated by the soil before arriving at the stove. As Anna inserted a split piece of her extremely dry oak into the firebox, it neither hissed nor smoked. It burst into flame. The burning was so full that hardly any smoke rose from the chimney. Just a wavering shimmer of heat disappeared into the snowstorm. She occupied herself by checking the airflow, fine-tuning the damper in millimeter steps to achieve the best burn rate. By lantern light, she perused her father's journal, following the illustrations of mental ventilation. Deep in her core, she now realized that engineering represents the ultimate expression of empathy. It is the practice of attending to future agony. By averting it, Otto rested peacefully on the carpet, his breath steady and profound, oblivious that a mile distant, canines were perishing from cold inside their enclosures. The bunker's quiet was profound, interrupted solely by the click of cooling iron and the gentle rustle of sheets. Anna felt no victory. She was merely correct. And in the wild, correctness is the sole force that sustains circulation. On the 4th morning, the blizzard finally subsided. The wind ceased, bequeathing a stillness so deep it pressed upon the ears. Dawn illuminated a terrain stripped of any recognition, 10-foot snowdrifts had engulfed fences and carts. The temperature stayed lethal at -30, and in this fragile, icy quiet, the inhabitants of Granite Creek encountered their judgment. From half of the town's chimneys, smoke ceased to rise, and despair shattered the social order. Pride and status no longer mattered. Only the primal need to keep warm remained. With a face turned gray from hypothermia, Captain Miller covered his wife and youngest child with blankets and started the trudging journey to the tree line. During the storm, he had noticed a heat shimmer above Anna's cabin, a subtle distortion in the air that indicated life. He understood its significance. He knew he must plead. They arrived in a disorganized, beaten line. Miller first, followed by Thomas the blacksmith, who pulled a sled carrying his trembling mother. After them came the rest 14 families altogether, a ghostly caravan trudging through snow up to their waists. Upon reaching Anna's cabin, they discovered the door was unlocked. Anna stood on the porch in a thick wool coat, with Otto following close behind. She observed their approach, her expression giving nothing away. Her eyes held no hint of "I told you so," just the detached, professional evaluation of a medic inspecting the injured. Captain Miller fell at the foot of the steps, his eyebrows coated with ice. "The wood?" he croaked in a shattered whisper. "It doesn't burn. We're freezing." "Anna." He couldn't complete the sentence about the small children. Thomas, the same man who had ridiculed the stability of her tunnel, refused to meet her gaze. He merely extended his hands, which were blue and shaking uncontrollably. The pride of the leaders, the soldier, the tradesman, the priest, had been erased by the winter's uncaring harshness. All that remained were terrified creatures searching for warmth. Without a word, Anna turned, opened the door, and motioned for them to come inside. However, the cabin was tiny, far too small to accommodate 50 people. "The cellar," she announced, her voice piercing the freezing air. "Go down." She directed them toward the trapdoor. As they climbed down the ladder, the heat struck them as if it were a tangible impact. The scent was of soil, dried herbs, and pure hot wood smoke. They crowded together in the tunnels, pushing themselves against the clay walls, which emitted the heat stored from the stove. Yet the real rescue came from the wood. Anna started handing up bundles of her kailine-dried, seasoned oak. "Take this to the settlement," she ordered, her voice free of bitterness. "Don't stack it up. Burn only one log at a time. It generates intense heat. Combine it with your unseasoned wood to help dry it." She described the concept of air circulation and how she had arranged the timber. The men now paid attention, letting the earth's breath pass through the wood. They listened with the desperation of men on the brink of death. Upon hearing the solution, Captain Miller picked up a log, noting its light, hollow weight and fearing any dampness. He examined the cross-hatched grain and the bark's dryness. It was a masterpiece of engineering. All he could utter was, "Thank you." For the first time in Granite Creek's history, the town elder expressed gratitude to the outcast. Over the subsequent weeks, Granite Creek's social structure was rebuilt based on the design of Anna's cellar. The 14 families lived through the winter not due to better weather, but by embracing the techniques of the woman. They had previously ridiculed her. Now, the Anna draft became a widely used phrase. Under her guidance, the townsmen started modifying their own houses. They were unable to excavate deep cellars in the frozen soil, but Anna demonstrated how to construct drying boxes. These smaller, insulated chambers utilized the chimney's waste heat to pre-dry the wood before it was added to the fire. Thomas learned from her how to craft superior dampers that enabled precise airflow regulation, transforming his simple stoves into efficient heating units. The church, previously a frigid barn where Reverend Good preached about suffering, had a thermal mass wall installed behind the pulpit. It absorbed heat during daylight hours and emitted it at night. Anna's status evolved from an outcast to a family leader. Leadership was not something she actively sought. It naturally came to rest upon her due to her abilities. Her father's journal was no longer a hidden relic. The town clerk meticulously copied it page by page. The hypocaust and ventilation shaft diagrams were posted in the general store, taking the place of the outdated regional maps. When Anna moved through the village with Otto, the skepticism that had once defined the town's attitude toward her transformed into reverent curiosity. Men touched the brims of their hats, not as a flirtation, but as a sign of respect. They now realized that survival on the frontier did not involve conquering nature through sheer strength. Instead, it required cooperating with the laws of physics. Anna proved to them that the Earth acted not as a grave, but as an energy source. Additionally, she demonstrated that the distinction between survival and death was frequently determined by proper air movement. The lasting impact of that winter was not the storm itself, but a radical transformation in how the community perceived the soil beneath them. They ceased building upward and began constructing underground. 140 years later, Granite Creek is a quiet archaeological excavation directed by the University of North Dakota's Department of Historical Engineering. The cabins have long since decomposed into the earth, but the ground retains traces of what was accomplished. Dr. Eris Thorne, the lead archaeologist, is located in a trench, gently clearing dirt from a preserved oak beam. It is darkened with age, yet remains structurally robust. He indicates the soil layers, the clear strata of clay and river rock that are inconsistent with the surrounding geology. "Look here," he says to his graduate students, pointing toward the remains of the ventilation shaft. "This is not a root cellar. It is a passive geothermal heat exchange device." The students lean over their tablets, documenting the measurements, and they conduct carbon dating on the wood fragments retrieved from the intake tunnel. The results confirm the date, late 1800s, but the chemical analysis of the wood confuses them. The lignin structure exhibits evidence of rapid, high-volume drying similar to contemporary kiln techniques. Yet this was performed in 1880, 3 miles from any industrial center. "She built a wind tunnel," Thorne explains, his voice filled with professional admiration. "She utilized the pressure differential between the residence and the tunnel to generate a vacuum that removed moisture from the wood. At a molecular level, we now spend millions on HVAC systems to achieve this level of efficiency. She accomplished this with a shovel and a fundamental knowledge of thermodynamics." The students look at the diagram reconstructed on the screen. The T-shaped passage, the cold air snorkel, the thermal mass of the living area, it constitutes a perfect cycle of energy conservation. They locate the remnants of the journal inside a rusted tin box, and the pages are fused together. However, the airflow vector sketches remain visible under ultraviolet light. It serves as a physical link to a mind that perceived the world not as it was, but as it could be engineered. The site is recognized as a historical engineering landmark, demonstrating that innovation often occurs in the darkness. Driven by the urgent need to survive, there is a profound silence that accompanies deep understanding, a quiet confidence that does not need to be loud to be noticed. Anna's story is not just a survival account, it is a justification of intellect against the noise of the masses. You find yourself at the edge of your personal winter. The voices of uncertainty are strong, and those in power claim your ideas are insane. Recall the woman who excavated the frozen ground. Remember that the majority frequently errs simply because they act out of fear, whereas the innovator reacts to the laws of physics. Our world values what is loud, quick, and superficial. We construct glass buildings that are unable to respire in urban environments that oppose the climate instead of cooperating with it. We have lost sight of the knowledge of thermal mass, the endurance required for the cure, and the honor in preparation. If you think this knowledge is significant, then you comprehend. A society's real value is not determined by its height of construction, but by its ability to sustain. Anna excavated her tunnel not to become a hero. She did it because she rejected letting others' ineptitude control her destiny. She embodies the calm, stoic rationality that forms the foundation of human endurance. The ground is ready, the laws governing heat and mass transfer remain unchanged. The wind continues to blow, and the cold still approaches. The issue isn't if the storm will come, but rather if you have constructed a refuge.